Hi friends, it's Marie.
And I'm Joyce.
This is my friend Joyce Hazlerig. I know you know her. And we've been hanging out for a couple of weeks-ish, sort of. You've come back a few times over the last few weeks to help us with hand spinning art yarns. And I, a couple of years ago, started spinning, maybe more than a couple of years ago, and bailed out because I really didn't know what I was doing. But when I decided I want to get back into it, called my friend Joyce and said, would you help me and therefore help us?
And you're doing a great job. You know, I mean, you already know how to do beautiful bats and you have all this fiber to work with. So we just kind of put everything together and, you know, you're going to spin art yarn like nobody's business. So.
And now y'all can spin with us too. So today we are going to spin yarn from Art Batts. So we've carted up our own Art Batts. We have some great spinning wheels to share with you. Joyce brought in her own, so we get a glimpse of another. She's going to teach us how to spin a single, which is just a single yarn without any ply. We are then going to core spin fibers as well. And she's also going to teach us how to ply. So we're going to ply on this beautiful art yarn that we spun from a bat.
Exactly. And then we'll take that and have a beautiful yarn.
I know that spinning might seem like a little bit of a deviation from what we normally do, but when you get into fiber art, you just find that you want to explore multiple directions, and sometimes you want textures that you just can't get anywhere else.
So many neat textures to put into your art bat, so why not?
Yeah, why not? So I love art yarn. I know lots of y'all have been drooling over it too, and we're going to share with you a deep dive intro into making your own with fibers you may already have. And then there's another video coming. You can check out the other video where we make Joyce's treasure yarn. But today, today she's going to show us how to spin from an art bat. In order to start spinning, you need to tie a leader yarn onto your bobbin, and Joyce is going to talk us through getting that started.
So I just take a length of commercial yarn. This is like an acrylic mixed with a little bit of alpaca, and I've got it kind of doubled over. I'm not going to worry about this end, but I just want to tie a half hitch on here. Some people go through the trouble of tying like a square knot or whatever, but I just find it easier to put a little piece of tape right here and tape this down. You basically just don't want this to move when it starts to spin. You want that yarn to stay in place because this is gonna start to build up over here, and once you do that, it'll take care of itself, but you don't want it to go around and around, and it's just really hard to kind of get that little granny knot super square. So you'll just tie the end of this into a knot to make pretty much like a big loop, and then you would put your yarn or your wool, your roving, in between here to get it started, and you can cut off this little crazy bit right here. So this is how we would get started. We're going to start by doing a basic single yarn, and with our lovely Sherwood forest blend that's silk and merino, it is going to be kind of a thick and thin, and we're going to use it in an art yarn application later. So it's okay not to be consistent, and we can just keep going. This is a great way to get the feel of how to spin a single yarn. To spin a basic yarn, we are going to first tie our little leader into the knot, and we have to put it through the little flyer bobbins and just kind of, pick the one that you're going to use. You're going to thread it through the orifice. You can use your hook if you have one or need one, and grab some of your roving. I have kind of stripped this one in half so it's a little bit more manageable, though it's really almost drafts itself. It's pretty well carded and fluffy. And I'm just gonna stick this through here. Do a spin. So people sometimes wonder how you get started spinning. So you just start spinning by doing it and experiment with it, and don't be afraid to use the good stuff. Like if you don't love how it feels, you're not gonna wanna use it. So this is a really fun thing to do. And we kind of joke around in the spinning world that every first yarn is art yarn. But you know what? Art yarn can be as intentional as you want it to be. It can be super planned out and intentional. You're like, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, and then I'm gonna do it, apply it with that, and then it's gonna end up in this awesome weaving or in my knitted hat or in my shawl. You know, whatever it is, it can be as intentional as you want it to be. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing kind of a, I'm drafting as I go. So I'm pinching my wool, or my roving, which is causing the twist to build up. And then I'm pulling back, that's drafting. And as we know, when we've got this carded wool, so that means that there's a set length to how long the staple is. And we can figure out that is by pulling it off. So this is the staple length of this particular wool. That's the terminus, you know, how long it is. Each little section is going to be about that long. Now, people panic at this point and they're like, oh my God, how do I get started again? The twist will do all the work for you. So the wool, it's got built-in little grabbers, just grabs on, and here we go. So, and this is going to be a thick and thin because I don't spin thin very often. It's really hard for me to be consistent. That is not my jam. So my jam is to do art yarn. And sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's a glorious chaos. And I like it that way. It looks like it's going all over the place, which it is. So I've got some really thin little sections right here. I've got some really big sections. It's all about letting things kind of happen. So I have to remember to move my little flyers up here. Otherwise, just to make sure that we're filling that evenly. I am pinching with this left hand and drafting with my right hand and feeding it. What you don't want is you don't want the twist to run back into your supply back here, into your roving. And I've actually pre-drafted the little section that I have, and there's a lot of potential energy in here. This hand is holding onto the twist, and you can tell how twisted your yarn is by, like, I'm gonna back out a little bit and I'm gonna kink it up and see how it's kinking up. And if I was to ply it onto itself, this is what my finished yarn, how thick it would be. Like if you were to apply it onto itself. And that's a good judge of, you know, is that thin enough? Is that where you want it to be? But just these are things that you want to be aware of. You're just wanting to feed this and draft as you go. And then when you run to the end of your supply, you can pick up another section of your roving. I'm just gonna pull this off. I don't mind dealing with it like this. I'm kind of that helps, but other people might want to put it into strips and lengthen it, pre-draft it so that they get a more consistent spin. But since this is art yarn, we don't really care about that. So I'm just pulling back on my roving. It's kind of a reverse inchworm. Some people actually like draft with this left hand. There's just so many different ways to do it. You're just gonna have to find the most comfortable way for you. Okay, I got a little bit of a spin situation, like kind of coming up into my roving, and it's gonna make my wool too thick. So what I'm doing is I kind of backed up a little bit, and I'm just like making sure I'm unspinning that so that I have it loose, and then I'll start it again. And now it's better. Anytime you kind of want to draft more in, this is always, you just let it come at a right angle, kind of pull it out, draft it, and let it join up. And then this would be kind of like your inchworm, where you're inching slowly forward. And then if you find that you have like too much wool, you can always kind of pull that aside and get to a comfortable, whatever's consistently comfortable. A lot of people pre-draft things, which is just kind of like pulling them out from each other a little bit, but you want to be careful because this one doesn't have a very long staple. It's like about 3 inches. So you just have to, if you get to a really thin part, then you're going to get really thin little pieces, sections, and then thicker sections, which will be okay in our art yarn application. But like with anything, the first thing you do is you must spin a single. So as I come to the end of my yarn, I'm just going to give it a little bit maybe of an overspin just in case. You're going to lose a couple of, like half a foot of yarn no matter what when you're kind of tying things off. But I just want to bring it out from here. So I'll either take this bobbin off and put it on my Lazy Kate over here and change it out, or I could wind it into a ball and use it that way. But this is basically the tail end, and I'm just going to kind of get it in here. Sometimes you can lose these tails in there. You just, want to be careful about that.
Joyce, I love this single that you spun from our Sherwood Decadence Blend.
It's really pretty.
Man.
I love it. It's got a lot of depth of color in it. There's some shine from that silk mix in there. And so from this, we have just a single, and by that I mean it's all spun in one direction, but you can see it's got some twist in there, and it wants to twist back on itself. People do use singles, but they're a little difficult because they have so much energy. As you can see, it wants to make this twisting on here. So we're going to use that energy when we ply it with something else. So even if that's just a thread, that will kind of finish off our single, and it'll make it a lot more usable for either crocheting or knitting or weaving.
Okay, and it makes it a little bit stronger too, doesn't it?
It does,
because
definitely.
You could sometimes
Yeah.
pull a single apart. Once we spin the Art Batt, you're going to show us how to ply. But let's say we want to ply 2-3 yarns, at the same time. How long can we leave it on the bobbin? Is it fine to leave it there?
It can stay. Embarrassingly, I've had stuff on bobbins forever,
Okay.
so that I've kind of forgotten about, and they're like, "Oh, where'd you come from?" So
Right.
It's not going to hurt it any. Some people like to leave their stuff on the bobbin to relax, but I'm not really sure if that's necessary with the way that I spin. Other people may disagree, but it's kind of one of those methods. People just do what they do. I just go straight from having spun it to reeling it off into a ball or onto a Niddy Noddy. Now, if you were going to ply it, you wouldn't put it on a Niddy Noddy.
Right, you will.
Because that's a finished skein thing.
Do you ever ply from a bobbin to the bobbin?
Oh, yes.
That's what you would do,
So
your Lazy Kate,
like
or
this
right
one,
on your little
This is a loose bobbin, so I would put it on my Lazy Kate, and then I could feed it back up into my wheel, and I would have whatever I was going to ply it with,
right.
On the leader, and we would just let it onto there.
So if you don't have enough bobbins, if you want to leave it on the bobbin, then you'll need extra bobbins.
Yes.
And if you don't have another bobbin, then you could just hand wind it into a ball.
Just hand
and
wind
ply
it into a
from there.
ball. I did that a lot when I had my country spinner,
Mhm.
and I just kind of pulled it off into a big ball and put that ball to the side or in a little shoebox or in a bowl,
Right.
and just go from there.
Fantastic. Okay, so now we get to spin from our Art Batt.
And it's going to be lovely. We're going to incorporate all of that texture. We're going to do a core spun art yarn, and that's using another thread to act as kind of like the strength and inside, and all the pretty fiber really shows as you spin.
Fantastic. It's going to be fun.
We're going to be spinning from this gorgeous Art Batt right here. Look at that. I'm guessing that this weighs about a couple of ounces, maybe a little more. It's nice. It's pretty hefty. When you start from this, you want to just pretend like it's roving is the easiest way, and grab yourself like a kind of a chunk of it. I'm going to go ahead and tear off that whole first chunk so that I have that ready to pick up. What we're going to do now is we are going to core spin. And core spin is just what it sounds like. You are making a yarn that is technically it's wrapping all over, it's going around and around this core. And this is a nice brushed mohair. It's really fluffy, so it's going to grab on to the fiber as we spin. And when you're doing this, you're going to work pretty close to your orifice, pretty close to the front, and you just let it grab on. And I'm going to start by kind of just seeing how it behaves. And this is amazing. It's so luscious. I love it. It's really soft. It's got a lot of sparkles in it and shine. So see how I'm holding this in my left hand as if it was my, you know, instead of pinching like we were doing on the single, I am holding it, and I am holding this almost at a right angle. And I'm just going to kind of get the feel of this. And I'm going to use my forefinger and thumb right here to kind of pull this out, and so start the wheel and just let it wrap around. I'm going to go show you a couple of things that you could do with this. You could do this really thin. See how thinly it's wrapping. This is almost like sea glass, like this color. I totally dig it. So I'm wrapping very, very thinly. I'm actually kind of smoothing it on with my finger. And then I'm going to change it up a bit. I'm going to make this kind of cocoon where I'm standing on that. And see that little tail right there? We're just going to smooth that in place. And then we're going to start again. And let some of this wrap on. So you can make this as thick or as thin as you want. And you want some interest in it. So if I wanted some really big poofy cocoons, I want to grab some of this a big section. When you're first getting started, you're going to kind of want to go slow and just see how, you know, how can I show off all of this really, really pretty material that's in your back. So can you see how I'm using this as I'm using my finger to kind of guide this on? And you can stand and let it build up right here and just smooth that out just a tiny bit. You can almost make like little shells. I want to expose that little, I didn't like how that was covering it up when I was kept going. So I kind of pulled back and exposed this little sparkly bit right here. And then it's almost like you're sculpting it, like I'm squishing it down a little bit, but I'm also just letting it glide on. If you squish it down, you're going to get a thinner core spun yarn. And then if you let it pile on, you're putting a lot of air in this. So sometimes it's all about the air, all about just kind of building it up and making these really airy poofs. There's a big silk section right here. And I think remembering to have contrast is important because that's where you're going to get a lot of interest in a finished yarn. So when we come back and we ply this probably with the same core, we'll ply it and it will spiral and we'll get these really lovely poofy baubles and textures and coils and things and shells, since this is so beachy right now. Don't worry about, you know, if it's not perfectly smooth when you're spinning. It'll kind of all work out in the end. Even let some of this kind of wrap at an angle farther down. See how it's kind of turning at an angle, almost like I'm plying it. You get this like little slant. So if you notice that you've got some fibers that you want to accentuate, you can turn, you know, orient your roving however, which way you want to do it so that it comes up on top. I don't know, like this way it's if I was spinning the other way, this would all get hidden under a little coil. But this, the way that I'm doing it, all of that silken stuff will be on top as it comes around. So I gotta tear me off another chunk of this. Let's get this going again. You know, to get your wheel started, just give it a little push, a little nudge, and you're back in business. So I like to let the wool grab on. You might notice that I'm going a lot slower with this particular spin because I want to be more deliberate. You know, I want to make sure that I'm creating enough large cocoons and small cocoons and really nice places of interest. You know, I want to be able to turn the fibers so that I'm highlighting, putting all those little sparkly things on top and making these little shell places and really cool, interesting core spin. And of course, as you get more excited about it, you'll go faster like I do. So if I wanted to, I could grab some of my little bits and pieces of the extras that I've got over here. Like we've got just a mix of locks and some Angelina right here. And I'm just gonna hold that in my roving hand, start my spin, and kind of just let that grab on for itself. If there's a piece of vegetation like there was right here, you can just kind of pick it out as you go. It's not a big deal. And you can make these little places of interest a feature. And you can see how they're just grabbing on. I'm just using the bat itself as like a little bit of a binder. I might come back and kind of just give it a little bit of a cocoon glaze on there to hold it on. And that's a really pretty, a little interesting kind of make a little jewel or a little nest. And you could do that throughout. You could do them as often as you like. Let's do another one. So I'm just grabbing a little bit of the Angelina, a little bit of these pretty border luster locks, and whatever this is, looks like viscose silk, bamboo, something shiny. And we'll give her a whirl. Whoops, blur it. Let's get started. And once again, you hardly have to do anything. It'll do it, you know? And then look at that. If we back out a little bit, you can kind of see how cool that is. If you want to see how it would look plied on itself, you can twist it up, test your twist, though correspondence has different levels of twist, but it's not over twisted. So I think we're doing just fine. The core is pretty strong and it's got all these little grabby fibers on it, so it's doing great. So just get us started again. And we'll let her go. But I think of all the spinning, I really love core spinning. There's so many different kind of applications that you can do it with, and from really fat, big, poofy baubles to, you know, making really, really thin areas where you're covering it just ever so thin. It's all just so much fun. I love doing this. So right now I'm going to give this a little bit of a twist. Now I'm twisting it and I'm going to make, look at that. It's like a little shell right there. And then later when we come back and apply that, that'll bubble up and look really cool. you get to a zen place of spinning and where there's a lot of possibilities, and just let the yarn do the work, or the wool do the work rather. Okay, I'm gonna spin one of those great big shells again. I just pulled off kind of a nice chunk of roving. I've stopped moving, right? And then I'm gonna take this big chunk and twist it in my finger. So now, essentially, this is a tiny piece of yarn, right? With a lot of twist in it. And then I'm gonna keep going, and I'm gonna allow this to wind onto here. I'm actually kind of twisting it as I go, just because I don't want it to lose that twist. And then pushing it up like this. There's an entire technique where you lay out little chunks of your fiber. It could be a totally different color. If you were spinning something like, say, like white, and then had great big blue or lime green kind of pieces, and you would have them all prepped in advance, and then as you spin, you would insert these ever so often. But I think it's kind of just a fun technique to show, and to get it to go back into a regular core spun, I'm just using that tail. So that's not moving in there. And we'll do another one of those, because those are fun to find in your yarn later and go, oh, that was so cool, I love it. Reinforces the whole beachy thing with the little shells. I'm really just trying to get all of this fiber in here and come to a good place where I know it's going to be pretty solid. It's kind of a slow process. You know, if you were doing a whole yarn like this, I usually don't have the patience for an entire yarn like that. But I like it. I like them just every once in a while in here. So just let that little tail go in there. But that is so dramatic. It's really fun. And the more that you can keep your roving at a right angle to your intake, and don't be afraid to get kind of close to your orifice. It's the downward angle right here that helps a lot too. If you were taller, you would be spinning up here, and this would be just a little more difficult to control. And if you find yourself getting like too far into the orifice, just, pull back a little bit and relax. Keep it at a downward angle from the orifice so that you're not getting too choked up. This will help you be more at a right angle with the roving. I would say I'm a history buff. I'm not a history expert, but I can speak to a little bit of the history of what we know of spinning in general, and the fact that this is a really old relationship that mankind has. If you look around, you're wearing clothing. We have clothes, we have woven carpets, we have upholstery that we're sitting on. There's all these different things. These are all made of threads, and people kind of are disconnected nowadays to how did we get from an animal that is wandering around growing this fiber and then taking it off or shedding it and then spinning that into cordage, or taking plant fibers. It's kind of like, who was the first person that thought of that? Who we don't know. Making cordage is or spinning wool is really old. We're talking 65,000 BC. China had silk culture. Egypt was producing flax and linen. And we know these things, but what we don't have is examples of those things that are that old, because they're gone from history. They didn't last. But people would find in Viking graves, they would find the little look like a little stone donut, but they didn't know what they were for the longest time. And this would have been a whirl that a wooden stick would have been through to make that twist, to make the yarn, to make the thread. And we can move from that to kind of like the spinning wheel. The earliest spinning wheel that we know about came from India. It's probably earlier than the 13th century, but the 1200s brought that spinning wheel. The plans kind of went out from there. From there, like, we don't have a spinning wheel as we know it until the 1600s, until the 17th century. And there's a huge thing that I'm sure people have seen called the Great Wheel. Also, sometimes it's called a walking wheel, and it is a huge wheel. It has no foot treadle on it, and it has no bobbin on it. It does have a spindle, but what we don't have is we don't have early examples of spinning wheels until, kind of what we think of as much later, which is not that long ago. But once we have this the treadle that runs the pulley, we have the drive band that drives this, we have the bobbin. This is all a very kind of feminine thing. This is like what women would have done, would have produced all of the thread and fiber and been responsible for all of that. They may not have been raising the animals, but they were definitely in charge of what happened when it came off the animal, what happens that, or, responsible for retting the flax and getting all that prepared. We call the woman's side of the family is called the distaff side of the family. And a distaff is kind of like a cage of twigs, or like it looks like a little whirligig kind of thing. And that's where they would have wound either flax or wool into it, and you would kind of like hold that against your body, and then that would be like your fiber supply as you used your drop spindle or a wheel to spin that. And so we call the women's side of the family is called the distaff side. And then we also have the word spinster, which was often thought of as a negative word because, you don't want to grow up and be a spinster, not get married and have kids. But that's an old-fashioned idea. A spinster was actually a really valuable person because there was always jobs. Running a household and keeping everybody clothed, the most basic of needs, there was always a job for a woman. Whether you were married or not married, you always had a job and you always had a place in that household, in that society, whether or not you were considered like, you were going to go on and produce children or get married or whatever. Mending clothes and making clothing is an entire thing. There's all kinds of different history about these things, and for good or bad, for good or evil, it has great big impacts upon our society. When the Industrial Revolution started, people often think of like the train as the steam engine as the big catalyst, but it wasn't. It was the cotton gin and the water frame that made it possible to make a lot of thread at the same time, that put a lot of small production places that were spinning flax or spinning wool, put them out of business, like the kind of mom and pop things. There's so many different aspects of history, but what we have today is we have a way to kind of, for pleasure, to go back and discover these things again for ourselves. People are always like, oh, that's a lost art. You must be so lucky to get to do that. And I'm like, it's not lost. It's a found art. Like you found it. I found it and I'm going to show you how to do it. So, I like rediscovering things, rediscovering the magic things. And yes, we live in the modern age, but this gives us the luxury to be a spinster by our own choice, So I am happily, I'm married, but I'm happily a spinster as well. Okay, well, we're coming to a stopping point. If I need to stop, I would just take it, and usually your wheel will have like a hook or someplace to wind it on my Ashford. I would do it on the tensioner knob, but here I've got this little tensioner knob, so I just wind it off onto that, and that holds it. So just want to loosen the tension, which I did by unscrewing this, and you can see my drive band is pretty slack, which means I'm going to have a lot of play in here. I'm just going to gently roll this into kind of a loose ball. I want to keep the tension on it. And I'm not doing it like super tight, but I definitely want it to be not with all the squiggles in it, if you know what I mean. Like you can feel like the tension as you're doing it, but it's not going to be in this ball for very long, so it'll be okay. And this is a good thing to know, that you can do this when you only have one bobbin or your bobbins are occupied. Find the end of it and pull it apart, or you could use scissors. So I want to hang on to that little end and get my yarn bowl, and then we'll put the yarn ball in the yarn bowl and we will apply this. This bowl has all these little holes in it, so if I was doing a thinner one, I could put it through one of these little holes and then it wouldn't get lost or anything, but I'm going to do it through this spiral area because I've got some of those big shells. So when I pick up my yarn again, I know I'm going to have spun it in a clockwise direction. So when I ply it, you want to ply in the opposite direction, in this case counterclockwise. Get my core again, my ply thread. Now it's not a core. Now it is going to be the ply thread because we're going to use the same one. So I split my leader yarn into two and I just tucked the plying thread and the yarn into there, so it's kind of stuck. And then now I'm going in a counterclockwise direction, and I just want this to take up ever so gently. So now I'm holding with my right hand, and I'm using this to feed on. Basically, this is a yarn as well, and this is a yarn that you just spun, and you're letting them marry together. As you come to places of interest, you can change it by sliding up. I don't know how well it's going to slide on this core, but it did all right because it's pretty grabby for a reason. Look at how fun that is. Super cool. So this is the single, and this is how it looks plied in a spiral ply, which is pretty standard. Allow this to wind on. And I don't know about you, but I love it. And you can do things like squish parts of it together, relax parts. So all those places of interest where we spun before and we were doing thick and thin, big, little, all of those different little shell things, they all have become kind of like just little interesting places, and you can squish parts together, slide things up, make it really interesting. This little piece right here, I want it to be real close so it becomes like a little shell, and we just let this continue. Sometimes you can take your ply thread and kind of make like these crazy little cocoons if you get like a kind of a length of it, and you can kind of just let it travel almost like an auto wrap. We'll just do a little kind of section like that. But you have to remember that it's, it will, like, don't let it get drawn all the way up into the orifice. It's kind of a pain to get back out again. But just for funsies. These are like little drifts of things that have been cast up on the beach. So when you go to finish these yarns, and by finish I mean give them a bit of a wash, you might be worried about, how that will affect it, but it actually doesn't. The only thing it does is it kind of unifies everything. Things tend to kind of puff up. We'll wind it into a skein and then we'll wash it. And I usually just put them in some hot water with a little bit of either unicorn scour or some other kind of wool wash, or use Dr. Bronner's soap sometimes. Something that's nice and mild and not very much, just like maybe a teaspoon. Just give it a soak for about 10 minutes or so. It doesn't have to be screaming hot water. Just kind of like just on the edge of comfort to put your hands in. And then leave it in there for 10 minutes, and then I put it right into some cold water.
So once we're all finished, now to get it off our bobbin, when you're ready to take it off our bobbin, we're going to wind it onto the Niddy Noddy, which the Niddy Noddy is like, helps us make a skein. Exactly. Right?
So you're going to hold it in your hand and you're going to go down up this way. And if you're not going to trap your hand, as I guess is the best way to say that. Make this looser. So as long as you're going to get into this kind of groove situation. And see how I'm still holding it and I'm not crossing my hand, so I know I'm not trapping myself. Because if you were to cross over this way, it would not be good. And I know that every wraparound makes 2 yards. So afterwards you can count each little line and multiply it by 2, and that'll tell you the yardage of your skein. Niddy Noddies typically come in a 1 yard or 2 yard length. And we have reached the end. So once we reach the end, I'm just going to cut this part off. And I'll tie this in a little bit of a knot just so that it's not going to run away from me. Okay. So the little end I just wound around and kind of tucked into here. But these, I'm going to split the skein and do a figure 8 right here. So I just want to take my little bit of ribbon, or this can be yarn. I like using the ribbon. Just makes it kind of nice for people. And it's really obvious. And if you tie this off with yarn and it's so thin, you might not be able to see it, or it could blend in. Be careful about using something that might bleed when you wash it. So you don't want to do that. So I just tied that off, and I'm going to do that once again. It doesn't matter if these are even. This is just to keep it from tangling together when you wash it. So you can also just do it like a little overhand knot like that. Just something that's secure. Split it and want to make sure you gather all of the strands, and then I'm just tying a little overhand knot. And this kind of keeps it straight, keeps it like together, and then you just pop off one of the arms and untie this part. I tied it in a little half hitch right there, slip knot, and then we'll find the end of that one. And sometimes the beginning and the ends of your yarn can be a little bit less than beautiful, if you know what I mean. So don't worry about that, because when you go to use it on something, you'll probably cut that part off. It's just part of it. So this one I'm doing just a little bit of a modified kind of figure 8 and tucking that end in. It's not really, I don't want to tie a knot on there because I don't want to have to accidental cutting, but there. This is our finished yarn. And when I let it go, you'll see the twist. Not too much of a twist. So all of when we plied it, it took out some of that twist. If this was a single, it would have more energy in it. But even this energy, once you wash it in hot water and soak it in cold water and then hang it up to dry, no need to put a weight or anything on it, this will be ready to go. When it's washed and dried, it'll even be more lovely. The puffs will puff up even more and things will kind of even out. And it should have very little twist at the end after that. But for now, we're all done.
So Joyce, after watching you spin that yarn, I'm just totally inspired.
Yeah.
I went home and did my homework, but I took your amazing yarn and I did what you told me, and I did it with our wool wash, which was our unicorn wool wash, just a little wool wash. Yeah. Rinsed it all out, just hosed it off, and then did a soak with vinegar and lavender, a little bit.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Sounds
spun
good.
it out and then just hung it to dry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. I mean, it's so inspiring in all the colors and
It's really
textures.
pretty.
And now I know that's the spiral. You call it a spiral ply.
A spiral ply. There's a little bit of like pushing up the beehives
Yep.
and stuff. And
Coils and
coils
or bubbles,
and super
whatever.
coils.
Yep.
Yeah, people
Okay.
have a million names for it.
Okay.
But it's mostly just a standard spiral ply.
I love it. And then my homework I did on my jumbo e-spinner, which I like because it just fits on my tabletop.
It looks
And
fantastic.
Oh, and I just made mine a little bit more blue, but like you, I just tried to copy you, teacher, and added in locks and Angelina.
You can't really go wrong. You can see where the locks are. There's little places that look like a little jewel. There's a lot of interest. So you want to test for balance to make sure that you've balanced it, and it shouldn't twist anymore. So it should be
perfectly balanced, and it looks like it is, and you've done a good job.
No, thank you.
So spin clockwise, ply counterclockwise, wash, and check it out.
Yep.
Perfect. I just want you to know this has been just so informative for me. One, you've helped me build confidence, and two, really sharing your tips and techniques. And now I'm just ready to play more and make some more
inspiring
themed yarn. Yeah.
I hope everybody will want to spin, because this is a really fun that gets really addictive.
Yeah.
So you just want to keep going. And this is how I came to spinning. I always think I came to things backwards, because I started as a needle felter.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went into wet felting.
Right.
Then Nuno felting. Then washing and dyeing wool. And then spinning.
That's exactly my journey.
Yeah,
You just told my journey.
Yeah. And then, and so, I don't know what else we can learn, but I'm sure there's stuff out there, because you never stop learning. But this is inspiring to make. I love making beautiful yarn. I find it very relaxing.
I tell you the truth, the reason I learned to make art bats is because I wanted to make art yarn.
Oh, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the whole reason.
It's just, they're so luscious and fun to do, and you can just incorporate them into your felting and art anyway.
Other fiber art.
Yeah.
So we hope you guys will give it a spin and give us a call if you need any help. We have the country spinner, we have the kiwi spinner, and we have the jumbo e-spinner too for the tabletop. I'll be glad to answer your questions. And thanks so much, Joyce, just for sharing this with us.
Well,
and
you're so
I
welcome.
hope we'll spin
Thank you
some
for
more
having
together.
Me. I know.
Always
I can't
a
wait.
pleasure.
We should just hang out and spin.
I know. I love having you.
I'm coming over.
Okay.
I'm coming over.
I love it.
All right.
Okay. Bye, y'all.